Revenue is essentially Chapter 70 plus the local contribution. And folks can dig in and verify those numbers. You go to the cherry sheet, you'll see the revenue that's coming, and you'll see the assessments, how much goes to charter schools, for example. And then the state makes that promise. The state says, this is the legal requirement, the legal minimum. That's what foundation is through the lawsuits through the 90s about how can we provide a basic education, an equitable education. The state says you have to provide a foundation. What the deal is, the state will kick in up to about 86% of that. That's what Chapter 70 is, if the city can demonstrate, or city or town can demonstrate the match, the 14%. And it's also broken down by category. So these reports are on DESC's website, where you can see how much the state plans to commit, how much the state says it will cost to educate the bare minimum for a New Bedford student next year. And it even advises what categories. The state even calculates how much you should spend in each category of that minimum. So of the minimum, it says that New Bedford should spend next year $11 million on administration. We actually spend half that on administration. We spend half. We spend one of the lowest administration in the state. It's actually going to be lower again next year. You'll see in the budget book. Where we do spend more is we do spend more on things like counseling, student support, health services, special education. We finally have been able to spend the minimum on maintenance. We have a strong and growing maintenance and facility staff who do a great job. And we've finally been able to close what was called a teacher gap. So we have more staff in schools, more para-educators in schools. So I won't spend too long on this, but just to know that it's all formula-based. And this is basically, there are 14,000 resident students in the charter schools and the public schools, and the city has to demonstrate, once it gets to Chapter 70 of $271 million, it has to demonstrate spending of $314 on those students for next year. So it has to demonstrate that $43 million as part of the Chapter 70 partnership. That's what this looks like, state aid and the city contribution that should be demonstrated. But what that looks like in practice is actually very different because you have assessments for VOC, you have assessments for Aggie, you have assessments for the charter schools. And when you actually break it down, once that match is demonstrated, once the minimum goes to every school district, what you see is actually the contribution that ends up in New Bedford public school classrooms is far lower than ends up in VOC, in Aggie, or the charter schools. Retiree health care is counted as a demonstration. The school committee doesn't receive that. The pension assessment is counted as a demonstration. The school committee doesn't receive that. And so that essentially comes off the per pupil that goes into a New Bedford public school classroom. So whereas up to $3,000 will go into a charter school classroom, up to $3,000 plus will go into the vocational agricultural school, in some respects, about $1,000 of city contribution goes into a New Bedford public school. I did see this report. I want to make a plug for it when we're talking about revenue. Mike Goodman, who's a public policy professor well established at the UMass Dartmouth School of Public Policy, put out a New Bedford property tax simulation tool. So you can actually see, if you put in your assessed value, you can estimate your property tax bill for a previous year and see how much has been spent from that property tax on public schools. You'll see that New Bedford Public Schools gets about $1,000 on a $4,500 bill, and the charter schools get about $500. Now you'll note that the charter school population is 10%, so it's half, but it should be lower to 10%. So I just think it's an interesting tool to demonstrate how much revenue actually gets to the school committee to go into New Bedford classrooms. So that's revenue. It is very important. That's one reason we've been able to present balanced budgets. We do a lot of work forecasting how much revenue will come in as early as possible.